Greetings everyone, Slurgical here, and welcome to my 3D terrain vlog. I want to make timber to frame a door frame so I can build a building around it. I use CAD with no problems. I'm normally using CAD program, I'm very comfortable with CAD, but for creating more organic shapes and forms, you have to use a sculpt program. I'm currently using and learning Blender, and it's a really complicated piece of software. So when I design, I do something called hard surface, like you see that door frame. And the hard surface, I do it in a CAD program. When I design the hard surface, I then import it into the sculpt program like Blender. As I mentioned earlier, Blender is really complicated. And one of the reasons for that is because it covers a whole bunch of things. You can do some CAD stuff into it, but it's not really good at that. You can do animation and you can do it's so much stuff. Like video games can be created using this, as well as movie effect and all that. And it's really advanced and powerful. And it's free to download. You saw me typing up there while I was talking. I'm just saving it into my normal naming convention. It is very important that you're really organized in how you name your files and every single aspect and every assets that you do in the program so you know what's going on all the time. Let's get into the meat and potatoes of what I'm doing. So now I want to create a medieval lumber. So we take for granted that we go to the lumber store and we get lumber and it's done 2x4. So now what I'm doing, I'm creating a 2x4 and I'm going to be using the same way that they used to do it in the medieval days. They didn't have mills and things like we do now. So I'm just playing around with making a tree like you see right now. I'm just using a cylinder. And I'm fumbling a lot around because I'm still new at that. So I try to increase the size of that cylinder to make the tree trunk, but I'm not too familiar with the tools yet. So so I'm scaling things around to make it bigger so I can cut the lumber to be able to fit the size of the framing that I want. Back in the day, in the medieval times, to be able to cut the tree into lumber in like 2x4s, they would be marking a point on 4 points around the tree trunk, so they would be able to cut and make straight lines. Since I don't have a marker to be able to do that, I decided to make some cubes. Then I will extend it into long sticks like that, and I will place them in all 4 corners by duplicating that one stick that I made. And I'm just going to put one right there. And I'm going to do 2 more on the other sides. And the idea is that I want to square that circle to be able to make the cuts to make the 2x4s. Once that's done, I'm just going to look around to make sure that I get what I wanted. And I'm pretty much happy with this. This is exactly what I want. It's pretty amazing that back then, without chainsaws and mills and planners and all those things, that they accomplished straight pieces of wood, and the only way to do it was this way. And it used hand axes. So they would notch up the wood at each of those markers to the point where it connects to the line. So with that hand axe, they would notch all along the wood where those connecting points, like in my case, it's those little sticks that I have. So you see, you notch it there, and I'm gonna notch the entire trunk all across that way. So let's pretend that I have an axe and I'm using a tool called trim, and I'm just gonna trim little squares like that. Now, by using the axe, they did it in V's instead of me doing it in squares like rectangles like that. And one of the reasons why I'm doing it in rectangles is because I don't know how to make V's. But they did, and they had an axe. But the difference is I'm not going to get injured. There's no chance of it unless I fell off my chair. And in their cases, they might injure themselves by axing themselves. Now, as you see, I just did two sides. In their case, and I have to do the other sides. So all across that, you have to do all four sides. And what I'm saying, they're doing full trunks, so it could be the length of a car or two cars. So it's a lot of work. Now that I notched the whole entire tree trunk that I have here, I'm gonna remove the sticks that I put to as markers. Now that our tree trunk is entirely notched out, it's ready for the next step, which would be planing it, making it flat on all four corners. I then realized that I couldn't see the notches I made, so I brought back all four of those sticks that I made so I can cut those notches where they need to be. And as you can see, I just did this and I forgot to select the object. You always have to keep track of what you're doing. Now that I selected the object, you saw, now it's cut properly. Now they're doing that with an axe. I'm using the trim tool to just cut everything flat at that shape of the square there. But they're using every single notches. They go from one notch to the next notch to keep the line straight. And this is with axe. So they would stand above the trunk or right next to it, and they axe toward themselves. So they could easily injure themselves by hitting their knees. So it's really dangerous job they were doing. And our days we can fall into the saw and get all mushed up that way. In those days, they would just hack themselves, and it could be potentially be a life-threatening injuries and life-changing. Obviously, you split your kneecap in two. There's not going to be lots of running around and cutting things and lifting things. Now that we cut our tree in square, so we can have beams and 2x4s. Now, if you leave it like this, it can be a perfect support beam, but that's not what we're trying to do here. So I'm bringing up next to the door frame to see how it fits. And the great thing with that size of the tree that virtual tree, digital tree that I cut, I can use this to completely frame this door frame. So I can build a building around it. Obviously, it's too thick to be able to do a proper door frame around that. So what they did with a two man saw, they would just saw all the way across, and they would do it evenly like that. They can make their 2x4s, equivalent of 2x4s. The measurement back then and compared to today are completely different. They didn't use feet. Well, they did have the same term, but they meant different things in sense of distances. Obviously, every single time that I need lumber or want to make a support beam or anything like that, I'm not going to take a cylinder and cut it to shape into a square to be able to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to get a square cube, and I'm just going to extend it to the length, the height I want. Then after that, I'm going to go and do the thickness I want. And here you go. You got your 2x4. And I'm just sizing it to fit my door frame. So far, I'm not sure exactly how long the video has been, but you can see it took me only seconds to do that compared to, let's say, 5 minutes of doing it the other way. So way back then, what might have taken them a day or two of hard work to be able to do 2x4s to fit the door frame, it's the equivalent of kind of this in a way. That's where the name convention is really important for parts when you're on the top right that you see there. So I have my plank, my 2x4 that I want, and I'm going to duplicate it. And the first one that I made is going to be the template, because instead of redoing a box and then extend it and widen it and all that every single time, I have the template to do it. Now, once the template is done, it's not as easy to mark the wood to make it look like old wood, or to show that it's wood plank, like you can see on a 2x4. Because right now what you see is the sides, and the sides is only one side. One size. So each of those sides, I'm going to do, I just did something called subdivide, and I'm subdividing every little section. So when I come to draw on it, the wood grain, it will show, because I don't want it to be too much high quality of little squares, because I don't need that. And it's going to take, the more squares that I have there, the more, the larger the size is gonna, of the file is going to be. And there are different modes for you to be able to do this. And I was in a mode to be able to cut and make the object. You can't do the wood grain, so I have to go to the sculpt uh, section of the program and figure out the wood grain with that object. So I'm just looking around and trying to figure out the size of the brush I need, the depth, the strength, the diameter, and it's a lot of trial and error. And I wasn't sure exactly if I erased because I had to step out, so I came back just to make sure that it's subdivided the way I want it. Now that the 2x4 is exactly the size I want and subdivided the way I want it, I'm just trying the brushes to see which one would be the best one to do the wood grain. And that's a lot of trial and error, because depending on the subdivision that you have for the object you're doing, and the strength and the depth and all that, and the diameter, see, this is not okay. It, when you go too far, it breaks down the object, and then it will give errors. So you have to be careful on how you're doing that, and it's more like practice and practice. It's not something I know how to explain, and I'm just comparing right now to see the subdivision, if it's, I've done something wrong there or I should change it. So I'll be going back and forth and trying that until I get the right perfect subdivision that I needed. After trying it quite a few times, I got exactly what I needed. I thought I did earlier, but I didn't. And I'm just doing now the wood grain and trying the different brushes. Well, I'm just going to basically be using one brush for that. And but the corners are going to be too sharp, and I want to age the wood a little bit, so it's not just freshly cut and then make the frame. I want an older building. Also, you don't have to do the wood grain on every single sides. I'm doing it right now so I can test print it. But if I design a building and only one uh, face of the wood is going to be shown, if I do the wood grain everywhere, it will take a lot of memory, it will take a lot of time, and it's never going to be shown or printed. So always work on the side that you're going to be showing. One more thing that I need to figure out is, when I do the subdivision while selecting all sides, uh, it's not equal. See, it's a rectangle, so they're gonna be a smaller space. And but when I subdivide, let's say, for 150, like I did there, it's 150 on a smaller thing, so there'll be more uh, tiny squares on one side than the other side. So what I should really do, but I don't know the ratio yet. I should do, let's say, 150 on one side, and the other smaller side I should do another subdivision number. So it's, at the end, it's equal everywhere. Now that I figured out the wood grain settings, I want to smooth out the edges because they're still really sharp, and see, it goes all over the place because I'm just trying different settings until I find the right one that fits what's needed. And again, that's another bunch of trial and error. Now, I saw some videos of some other digital artists that use a scrape tool, but I guess they're using a lot higher subdivision than I do, so the scrape tool did not work out the same way for me than it did for them. But in their case, they're doing it for video games, so the details are much greater. And it would be an enormous file if I did it for 3D printing. So the results can be really harsh. See, it's this going to be a horrible, and odds are it's going to fail on the printer. And since I was struggling with the corners, I decided to use the template again, and try the trim tool versus the smoothing tool. The trim tool kind of worked, but it was still too sharp. When I increased it too much, it was damaging the object too much. And you can see it in the corners there, like it's just taking chunks out. Like if a blade was very dull when you were cutting the wood. And I was starting to get better results now with the smoothing tool. The problem with the smoothing tool is if I smooth the tool on the wood grain that I already made, it will smooth the wood grain too. So I redid all the wood grain since I knew the settings from before. I just repeated, just the drawing on it will be different. The grain would be different. Now the tool that I use to do the wood grain, it's called crease. And there are two of them. There's crease sharp and there's a regular crease. So I initially did the regular crease and I decided to do the sharp one to see. Now the sharper one, it adds more strength to the depth and it's not as widespread when you apply it. So decided to do add it on top of what was there and making some harsh markings. So when I 3D print, I see the difference of both of them and whichever works best for 3D printing. Because right now it looks fine. It looks like kind of looks like a wood 2x4. But when you print, that's what's important, to see the details that's going to come out. I'm printing with FDM, so it's going to be a bit not as high quality as if it would be with resin printing. But you don't really want to 3D print in resin printing the terrain because it's too expensive, too long, and it's a lot of work. Now let's send it to the printer and see how that turns out. And I don't really see any of the wood grain in there. None of the details turned out. I guess I need to have harsher strength when I do the wood grain. I had no problem with the other software that I used before, Nomad 3D, and it worked out great there. But this is new software for me, and I guess it just doesn't. What translates in the other one doesn't necessarily translate in this one, and it's all good. It's all about trial and error, and you can't always be successful in what you do. You just have to see what you can do to fix the problem. And I want to give a special thanks to Andrew Dutton, who is my first paid member of Patreon.